In this video, I'll share with you our analyst outlook for Europe, Middle East, and Africa in 2015, as well as the management priorities of the multinational leaders we work with. The largest markets in EMEA are no longer delivering the kind of headline growth that makes it easy to grow your business in those markets. Looking back at 2010, apart from the Eurozone, there was pretty strong growth. Even in Germany, there was pretty strong growth. But looking ahead to 2015, in many of these markets, we're seeing barely half the growth levels that we saw before. France and Germany cut in half. And then the key emerging markets, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, across the EMEA portfolio, also half or less of what they were posting just a few years ago. So companies need to be a lot more creative about where they find opportunities. You can't just go after the big markets, the big countries, the big cities. And that's what we recommend on the following slide, is to look at what we call untapped pockets of opportunity. Let's just take Russia, for example. In Russia, most multinationals have planted their flag in the country in Moscow or St. Petersburg, very large cities that tend to mirror the overall levels of growth and spending of the country at large. But as you can see in the blue, where we highlight some key cities of opportunity, Krasnodar, a city near the Black Sea, less than 1 million people, one of about a dozen cities that have less than 1 million people, but actually posting very good numbers and making it pretty easy for MNCs to do business there. It's a well-rounded economy with both agricultural, manufacturing, and tourism anchoring that economy. And as you look at countries as a whole in the orange, you can see that there are sectors that are quite resilient even when the overall market is doing poorly. In Russia, that's luxury goods, where you see on a global level, Russian spending on luxury goods is among the world's most resilient. And as Russians might travel slightly less in this sanctions environment, they'll be doing more of that luxury spending at home rather than abroad. So there are opportunities in pretty much every industry and within pretty much every major geography, even if at the headline level, things don't look so good. Now let's take you on a quick tour of the sub-regions of EMEA, starting with Central and Eastern Europe. And FSG's key message to our clients here is that we need to start thinking really at a more differentiated level for our CEE strategy. Historically, it's been treated as one region, typically one manager responsible for all of it. But the Central Eastern European countries that are tied to the Eurozone are increasingly integrated into policymaking and economic trends there, while Russia and its neighboring ex-CIS countries like Kazakhstan or Belarus are really increasingly integrating themselves. You can see that somewhat reflected also in the growth numbers on the right. Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan posting actually pretty good numbers, as does Turkey. Russia and Ukraine, pretty disappointing, and we think that that will continue into 2015 given the ongoing frozen conflict in those areas. So this has implications for growth strategy, where you've got to look beyond just the big markets and think about markets like Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan. And it also has implications for organizational strategy and whether it really makes sense to have a CEE leader or shift focus in a more targeted fashion to Russia and CIS countries and integrating markets like Poland, the Czech Republic, and so forth into a Europe strategy. Now looking at Middle East, North Africa, clearly a volatile market that's been quite challenging for companies to manage. There was a high hope going into 2014 that Iraq was still going to deliver some positive growth. At a headline level of GDP, we may see that purely from oil coming online, but as a place to do business, it's clearly challenging with ISIS and active conflict going on there. So Iraq and Libya, high-risk markets only for organizations in very, very specific sectors. Companies that we see continuing to grow profitably in Middle East, North Africa are focused on the markets you see here highlighted in green. Relatively low risk, still relatively moderate to high growth potential. These are the markets in the Gulf: Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar. Israel. That is always a place to start if you're not already doing a lot of business in the Middle East. The more mature organizations, interestingly enough, are focusing quite aggressively on North Africa now. Egypt, Algeria, Morocco that you see highlighted in yellow are all markets where there's a lot of business to be done. They're quite significant in terms of their market size, and in the case of Morocco and Algeria, making significant moves to make it easier to do business. Tunisia is also notable for just having had its second free election with a free transfer of power, in this case from an Islamist government to a more moderate government, which bodes quite well for the stability of that economy. One other thing, of course, we have to note here is Iran, where it's still pretty uncertain as of this recording what the fate of the Iranian nuclear program will be and the implications for sanctions relief that would open the doors potentially to Western business, especially American headquartered businesses. But it is a massive market, number 2 or 3 on most indicators within that portfolio. And as the doors open, it could make a big difference. All of our clients to prepare, build networks, build familiarity with that market today. Now on to sub-Saharan Africa. And the story here is in fact quite clear. This used to be a market of risk, challenge, conflict, and instability. Governments have made terrific headway in managing down those kinds of problems and focusing now on building better regulation, more predictable spending patterns, better infrastructure, and regional integration. You see that reflected in the GDP stats here that we show for 2015. What's great news here is how broadly based the growth story is across African markets. Tanzania at 8.1%, Uganda, Angola over 6%, Nigeria and Kenya not far behind. You see the East, West, and South all represented here. The key thing for corporates to keep in mind from a growth strategy perspective is that you don't want to prioritize your investments based purely on these kinds of rankings. You want to focus on getting to scale. That means you need to have a regional strategy, an East Africa strategy or a West Africa strategy, and find your hub and build your market where you can get to reasonable profitability levels more quickly and build market familiarity more quickly. So that tends to put, based on our recent travels to the market, Nigeria and Kenya very much in the spotlight for companies that do not have a strong Africa presence. And when you look across frontier markets in the EMEA portfolio, you can see that Africa very much leads the pack over the long term. Our analysts conduct forecasts on key leading indicators of the economy, looking out 10 years into the future. Just looking from 2013 to 2017 in this chart, you can see that the cumulative growth rates in many African markets top 30%. And it's only when you see Qatar and Kazakhstan in the mid-20s and low 30s that you see markets outside of Africa posting those kind of sustained high growth rates. That compounding power can make very rapid growth happen for companies that are capturing key markets, key areas of increased spending. And we're seeing a greater shift towards consumer spending in these markets. The challenge is always that every company must manage in these countries is the smaller scale and the operational risks. So you need to have clear market insight to build a clear strategy. We asked the general managers of EMEA markets to tell us where they were placing their bets, setting aside the headline growth numbers and the economic forecasts. Where did they see business opportunity for their top line revenue growth? And you can see quite clearly in this chart what the results show. We asked them for each of the key 3 subregions of CEE, MENA, and sub-Saharan Africa, where their top opportunities were, and this chart shows the top 2 in each case. So for CEE, the key bet is Turkey. What's actually surprising to us is how many organizations still see Russia as a growth market. For a company that is not deeply penetrated into the Russian market, maybe hasn't expanded beyond Moscow and St. Petersburg, there can still be plenty of opportunity for a company with a good brand and clear competitive differentiation to grow quite quickly. Within the Middle East, North Africa, Iran leads the pack. Companies have finally become quite bold and purposeful in developing an Iran strategy. This year was the turning point from the way we see it, where companies are taking action to prepare. and build the business cases and the strategies that they can deploy as soon as a market opening occurs, should it occur. In sub-Saharan Africa, interestingly enough, still a majority of the clients that we polled said that South Africa was their number one opportunity, with Nigeria coming in second at just 24%. Now, Nigeria, after the rebasing of its GDP to more accurately represent their economy, is in fact a larger economy than South Africa. If anything, this statistic probably shows a lag in corporate attention and confidence in shifting from a market where they're more familiar, have likely spent more time there, had operations there for longer, to the market that actually is more dynamic, larger, and faster growing. We also asked about profitability opportunities within the CEE markets, and here Russia again was number one. 40% of the clients said that Russia was going to provide the biggest profit pool for their CEE portfolio, with Poland and Turkey coming after that. That's big news because it shows that a lot of companies are in fact focused on consolidation, changing their product mix, and local production to manage their profit and their earnings coming out of the Russian market. Interesting to see that vote of confidence. We're working with plenty of clients on that kind of strategy development. And finally, we asked our EMEA GMs what capability is most important for them to develop in 2015. Very clearly, of the 5 areas that we probed on, was building a strong organization, revisiting the foundations of how they're organized, where responsibility lies, and how they deploy and develop talent was their top concern for a majority of our clients. Structuring effective partnerships coming in second, and prioritizing opportunities, particularly within Africa, as the third priority. Click on any of the other videos highlighted here to see our analysts' outlook for other regions of the world.